The Q continuum had observed countless universes across infinite dimensions, cataloged every permutation of existence, and grown insufferably bored with the predictability of it all. They had tested humanity, provoked Klingons, irritated Cardassians, and found every species in their reality disappointingly finite. But Q, VQ, as he preferred to think of himself, had stumbled upon something the continuum had somehow missed. A universe where chaos wasn't an aberration to be corrected, but the fundamental operating principle. He materialized in the black between stars, letting his consciousness expand across this strange new reality. No Federation, no Starfleet, no neat little moral lessons wrapped in prime directive packaging. Instead, he sensed militaristic empires grinding against each other, living ships that sang in languages he'd never heard, and technology that blurred the line between organic and mechanical in ways that made even his omnipotent sensibilities curious. And then he felt it. A ripple in space-time that shouldn't exist, not warp drive, not quantum slipstream, something else entirely, something that tasted of possibilities even Q hadn't considered. Wormholes, but not the stable, predictable Bajoran kind. These were wild, untamed, and concentrated in the mind of a single, impossibly average human who had no business possessing such knowledge. Q smiled, an expression that had preceded trouble across multiple realities. "Well," he said to the uncaring void, "this might actually be interesting." He focused on the source of those delicious wormhole equations, tracing them to a biomechanoid vessel fleeing through the Uncharted Territories, crewed by escaped prisoners and renegades who had somehow survived against impossible odds. Perfect. If you want to see more characters enter different universes, hit that subscribe button and drop the name of a character and the universe you'd want them to see them in down in the comments below. May the Force be with you. Q snapped his fingers, and reality obligingly bent to his will. Time to meet the neighbors. The flash of light in Moya's center chamber was neither pulse weapon nor energy discharge. It simply was. And then Q was there, examining his fingernails with theatrical disinterest. Pilot's voice immediately echoed through the biomechanoid ship, high-pitched with alarm. "Intruder on command. Unknown energy signature. Moya is confused. She cannot sense how this being arrived." John Crichton spun from the console, pulse pistol already drawn. The human astronaut had learned the hard way that survival in the Uncharted Territories meant shooting first and asking questions from behind cover. But something about the stranger in the absurd Starfleet uniform made his trigger finger hesitate. "Who the hell are you and how did you get on my ship?" Crichton demanded. Q examined Moya's organic walls with exaggerated fascination, running a finger along the neural clusters. Biomechanoid. How delightfully primitive. Though I suppose primitive is relative when you're traveling in a ship that's technically alive. Do you feed it? Does it need to use the bathroom? I've always wondered. Erin's son emerged from the corridor, her peacekeeper-trained instincts placing her in a flanking position, pulse rifle steady. "Answer the question or I'll burn a hole through your head." "You must be the peacekeeper," Q said, turning to her with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "All that wonderful military conditioning, and yet here you are, playing house with escaped prisoners and a human who shouldn't even be in this galaxy. How deliciously ironic." Dargo's Qualta blade ignited with a sharp hiss as the Luxan warrior stepped forward. "Pilot, seal all the chambers. This one doesn't leave until we have answers." Q laughed, a sound like crystal breaking. "Seal the chambers? Oh, my dear overgrown lizard, you fundamentally misunderstand the situation."
He snapped his fingers. The entire crew found themselves suddenly seated at an elaborate dining table that hadn't existed seconds before, complete with fine china and a roasted turkey that looked suspiciously Earth normal. Rigel belched in surprise, nearly falling off his throne sled. "What manner of sorcery?" "Not sorcery," Q interrupted, pouring himself wine from a bottle that materialized mid-air. "Just a little reality adjustment. You may call me Q. I'm omnipotent, immortal, and utterly bored with my own universe, so I've come to see if yours might provide some entertainment." Crichton stared at the turkey, then at Q, then back at the turkey. "Oh, hell no, not another one." Q raised an eyebrow, genuinely intrigued for the first time in centuries. "Another one? You've met omnipotent beings before in this backwater collection of star systems?" "Met, fought, barely survived, and developed a healthy distrust of anything that can bend reality," Crichton said flatly. He pushed the chair back. It didn't budge, held in place by Q's will. "Yeah, that's not creepy at all." Zahn, the blue-skinned Delvian priest, studied Q with unnerving calm. "You radiate power, but also emptiness. You seek meaning in the suffering of others." "Amateur psychology from a plant," Q said, though his smile tightened slightly. "How refreshing." Crichton leaned forward despite his immobile chair. "Let me guess, you're here to test us, teach us some cosmic lesson, maybe put humanity on trial for its sins? Because, buddy, I've got a news flash for you. I'm already on trial, every single day. Peacekeepers want me dead, Scarans want to crack open my skull for wormhole tech, and the only thing keeping me alive is this crew and a very pissed-off living ship." Q's eyes narrowed. "Wormhole technology in your brain?" He stood, circling Crichton with sudden predatory interest. The dining table vanished as quickly as it had appeared. "That's not possible. Wormholes of that nature require computational power far beyond organic neural capacity, unless..." He reached out, and Crichton felt a presence brush against his mind, not like Scorpius's neural chip, but deeper, colder, seeing things that shouldn't be visible. Aaron's rifle was aimed at Q's head instantly. "Get out of his mind, now!" "Fascinating," Q breathed, ignoring the weapon. "You are carrying a weapon you don't understand, and it's slowly killing you, isn't it?" Crichton's hand went unconsciously to his temple, where Harvey, his Scorpius neural clone, liked to make himself known. "That's none of your business." "Oh, but it is," Q said, snapping his fingers again. This time nothing visible changed, but Crichton gasped as the constant pressure in his head, Harvey's presence, simply vanished. "There, I've removed your unwanted passenger. Consider it a gift." Silence filled Moya's center chamber. Crichton touched his head again, feeling the absence of the neural clone that had tormented him for cycles. "What do you want?" Crichton asked quietly. Q smiled. "To see what you do next. You see, John Crichton, you're something I've never encountered. A human who survived impossible odds, not through nobility or moral superiority, but through sheer bloody-minded stubbornness and a willingness to embrace chaos. That makes you interesting, and I haven't been interested in anything for a very, very long time."
3 solar days later, Scorpius received a report that made his thermal regulation system spike dangerously hot. The half-Sabacean, half-Scaran hybrid stood in his command carrier's operations center, watching surveillance footage that shouldn't exist. A humanoid, unknown species, unknown origin, appearing and disappearing at will across multiple Peacekeeper installations. No wormhole signatures, no transport beams, no dimensional rifts, just instantaneous relocation. And every witness reported the same thing. The stranger had been asking about John Crichton.
Enhanced magnification, Scorpius commanded. The image zoomed, revealing Q's face frozen in an expression of amused contempt as he stood in the middle of a peacekeeper garrison that had been trying and failing to capture him. Lieutenant Braca cleared his throat nervously. "Sir, 15 separate units attempted containment. He walked through force fields, ignored pulse fire, and at one point turned an entire squad into, the reports say, potted plants, though they returned to normal after he left." "Potted plants," Scorpius repeated, his voice flat. "Ferns, specifically, sir." Scorpius's cooling rods extended fully, struggling to regulate his temperature as his brilliant tactical mind raced through possibilities. This being had power beyond anything in the Uncharted Territories. If he could harness it, weaponize it, the peacekeepers would crush the Scarans within a cycle. The wormhole project would become irrelevant. But something about the surveillance footage troubled him. The being's body language suggested not threat, but boredom. This was something playing games. "Locate Crichton's vessel," Scorpius commanded. "Wherever this entity goes, Crichton will be involved. It's the only pattern that makes sense." As his command carrier altered course, Scorpius didn't notice Q standing directly behind him, invisible and watching with growing fascination. The half-breed was brilliant, Q had to admit, tortured by his own physiology, driven by the need to prevent a war through the very weapon that could start one. Tragic, really. Scorpius's entire existence was a testament to the futility of control in a fundamentally chaotic universe. Q made himself visible again, materializing directly in Scorpius's command chair. The bridge erupted in chaos, weapons trained from every angle. Braca shouted orders. Scorpius's cooling rods retracted as he spun, his cold eyes meeting Q's amused gaze. "You," Scorpius said simply. "Me," Q agreed cheerfully. "I've been watching you, Scorpius. You're trying to prevent a war between peacekeepers and Scarans by unlocking wormhole technology from poor John Crichton's overstuffed brain. How noble, how futile. You do realize that even if you succeed, you'll just escalate the conflict to extinction-level stakes." Scorpius moved with liquid grace, circling Q while his tactical mind assessed and discarded a dozen capture scenarios. "What are you?" "Omnipotent, omniscient, omnipresent when I feel like it. Think of me as a concerned observer. Though concerned might be too strong, mildly curious is more accurate." "You want the wormhole knowledge," Scorpius stated. It wasn't a question. Q laughed. "Want it? My dear tortured half-breed, I already understand it. I could create wormholes across this entire galaxy with a thought. What interests me is why you people are so desperate to tear each other apart over technology you're not ready to wield." He leaned close, his voice dropping. "Tell me, Scorpius, when you finally crack open Crichton's mind and unleash wormhole weapons, how many billions do you think will die before someone uses them to crack a planet in half?" Scorpius's expression never changed. "Fewer than would die in a prolonged Scaran peacekeeper war." Ah, the lesser evil argument. How very limited. Q vanished and reappeared at a console, examining peacekeeper star charts. He waved his hand, and the view screen filled with images that made even Scorpius's disciplined composure crack. Worlds torn apart, solar systems collapsed, entire species extinct, all bearing the signature of weaponized wormholes. "That's one possible future," Q said softly. "Of course, there are others, some better, most worse. The question is, do you have the wisdom to choose, or just the desperation to gamble?" Then he was gone, leaving only his laughter echoing through the command carrier's systems. Scorpius stood motionless for 3 microtots before speaking. "Set course for Moya. Maximum speed, and prepare neural interrogation equipment. We're going to need leverage." Q found Crichton in Moya's neural interface chamber, standing alone in the bioluminescent glow, staring at nothing. "Missing your mental roommate?" Q asked, materializing on the chamber's organic platform. Crichton didn't flinch. 3 days of Q popping in and out had dulled his startle reflex. "Harvey was a bastard, but he kept me company. Now it's just me and the wormhole equations, and they're getting louder." "Louder?" Q stepped closer, genuinely intrigued. "Elaborate." "It's like," Crichton pressed his palms against his temples, "like there's a radio station in my head, and someone keeps turning up the volume. Ever since you pulled Harvey out, the equations they're not just knowledge anymore. They're active, reaching out." Q's expression shifted from amusement to fascination. He'd seen wormhole technology across 1,000 species, but this was different. The knowledge wasn't simply stored in Crichton's neural pathways, it was integrated, evolving, almost alive. "May I?" Q asked, uncharacteristically polite. Crichton hesitated, then nodded. Q placed a hand on Crichton's forehead, and his consciousness dove into the human's mind. What he found made even an omnipotent being pause. The wormhole equations weren't just information, they were a map, a living, breathing network of connections between realities, dimensions, and possibilities that even the Q continuum hadn't fully charted. And at the center of it all was something that shouldn't exist, a bridge between Q's universe and this one, created by the simple fact that Crichton's wormhole knowledge and Q's presence occupied the same space. "Oh," Q breathed, pulling back. "Oh, this is remarkable." "What?" demanded Crichton. "What did you see?" Q smiled, but for the first time, it wasn't condescending. "You, John Crichton, are carrying something that could make even the Q continuum sit up and pay attention. The ancients who put that knowledge in your head, they weren't just scientists, they were architects. They were building pathways between universes, and you're the key." "Great," muttered Crichton. "So I'm not just a walking doomsday weapon for this galaxy, I'm a universal threat. That's just fantastic." "Actually," Q said thoughtfully, "it means you're far more important than I initially calculated, and that means certain parties are going to become very, very interested in dissecting your brain." As if on cue, Pilot's voice echoed through the chamber. "Crichton, command carrier emerging from starburst proximity. Scorpius is hailing us." Q's smile widened. "Right on schedule. This is going to be entertaining." Crichton ran for the center chamber, Q following at a leisurely pace that somehow kept him perfectly alongside the sprinting human. "You knew he was coming," accused Crichton. "I may have left him some breadcrumbs. What's the point of having an omnipotent being visit if there's no dramatic confrontation? I hate you so much right now." "Yes, but you need me, because Scorpius isn't alone." The view screen activated, showing Scorpius's face, and behind him, a Scaran warrior in full battle armor. "Hesmana," Aaron whispered. "Peacekeepers and Scarans working together?" "Impossible," Dargo growled. Scorpius's voice was cold, measured. "Crichton, we have detected an entity of extraordinary power aboard your vessel. Both the Peacekeepers and the Scaran Imperium have agreed to a temporary alliance to secure this being and your wormhole knowledge. Surrender both, and your crew will be permitted to leave unharmed." Q leaned into the view screen's pickup range, waving cheerfully. "Hello, I'm the entity, and I have to say, this is adorable. You two hate each other so much that you've teamed up against little old me. I'm touched, really." The Scaran behind Scorpius spoke, his voice like grinding stone. "You will submit to examination or be destroyed." Q laughed so hard he had to wipe tears from his eyes. "Oh, this universe is delightful. You people have no idea what you're dealing with, do you?"
The Scaran Emperor's war dreadnought emerged from Starburst alongside Scorpius's command carrier, a show of force that should have been impossible. Peacekeepers and Scarans had been locked in Cold War for generations. Their alliance, however temporary, represented a threat level Moya's crew had never faced. Aboard the Dreadnought, War Minister Akna watched the biological ship with predatory interest. The Scarans had their own intelligence on Crichton's wormhole knowledge, and they'd been planning to extract it for cycles. But this new element, this being who'd appeared from nowhere with reality-altering abilities, changed everything. "Analysis," she commanded. A Scaran technician manipulated holographic data. "Energy signatures are inconsistent with known technology. The entity appears to violate fundamental laws of physics. Thermal scans show no core temperature. Biological scans return contradictory data." Contradictory how? The entity registers as present and absent simultaneously, as if it exists in multiple quantum states at once. Akna's heat-producing glands flared with excitement. If the Scarans could capture this being, study it, weaponize it, the peacekeepers would be crushed, the entire galaxy would kneel. "Prepare boarding parties," she ordered. "Coordinate with Scorpius's forces. Full neural interrogation equipment for the human. Containment field generators for the entity." On Moya, Q watched the massive ships positioning themselves through the organic view screen, his expression thoughtful. "They're going to board us," Aaron said, checking her pulse rifle's charge. "We can't fight both a command carrier and a war dreadnought." "We could starburst," Pilot suggested desperately. "They'll follow," Dargo growled. "They've already locked tracking beacons on us." Rigel hovered nervously on his throne sled. "Perhaps we could negotiate, offer the entity to them in exchange for our freedom?" "Tempting," Q said dryly, "but I'm not particularly interested in being dissected by either faction. Their technology is charming in its primitivism, but I'd prefer to keep my molecular structure intact." Crichton turned to Q, his expression hard. "You did this. You painted a target on us by showing up and playing your stupid games. Now fix it." "Fix it?" Q asked innocently. "Where's the fun in that? Besides, I'm curious to see how you handle this. You've survived impossible situations before." "Not against unified peacekeeper Scaran forces." "Then perhaps it's time you learned a valuable lesson about the nature of power." Q snapped his fingers, and suddenly every weapon aboard both attacking vessels simply stopped working. Pulse rifles, ship cannons, torture devices, all inert. Scorpius's voice crackled over the comm, dangerously calm. "What have you done?" "Leveled the playing field," Q announced cheerfully. "No weapons means you'll actually have to talk instead of shoot. Novel concept, I know." Akna's response was immediate and brutal. "All personnel prepare for physical boarding, hand-to-hand combat protocols. That ship's crew dies today." Hundreds of peacekeepers and Scarans began suiting up, armed with blades, clubs, and their own considerable physical strength. They didn't need energy weapons to kill. Crichton stared in Q in disbelief. "You just made it worse." "Did I?" Q asked innocently. "Or did I just make it more interesting?" Zahn stepped forward, her voice calm despite the crisis. "Entity Q, your actions endanger innocent lives for your amusement. Is this truly how a being of your power chooses to exist?" Q's smile faltered for just a microsecond. "Innocent is a stretch. Your crew are escaped prisoners after all. We're people trying to survive, something you clearly don't understand." For the first time since arriving, Q looked uncomfortable. The continuum had long ago transcended concepts like survival, fear, or genuine consequence. But something about Aaron's words, the raw honesty of it, struck a chord he'd forgotten existed. The first boarding parties hit Moya's hull with magnetic clamps and cutting torches. DRDs scattered in panic as bulkheads began to glow red from external heat. Moya herself moaned through the ship-wide systems, a sound of distress that made Pilot's voice crack with emotion.
They're cutting through Tier 7. Moya's frightened. She's never experienced coordinated assault from both Peacekeepers and Scarans. Dargo took position at the primary breach point, Qualta blade ready despite Q's weapon sabotage, leaving it unable to fire. At least I can still cut them. Aaron moved to flank him, drawing a traditional Peacekeeper dagger from her boot. Weapons or no weapons, I've killed with my bare hands before. Chiana appeared from the maintenance shaft, clutching a length of metal pipe. We're really doing this, fighting hundreds of soldiers with sticks. Unless our omnipotent friend decides to actually help, Crichton said, glaring at Q. Q leaned against Moya's organic wall, examining his fingernails with theatrical disinterest. You're missing the point entirely. I didn't remove their weapons to handicap them. I removed them to see who you truly are when the veneer of civilization gets stripped away. We're about to be murdered, Rigel shrieked. Yes, but how you face that murder reveals character. The first bulkhead breached with a shower of sparks and flash-frozen atmospheric condensation. Peacekeepers poured through, commandos in light armor, wielding combat batons and vibroblades. Behind them came Scarans, massive and terrifying in close quarters, their heat-generating biology turning the corridor into a furnace. Dargo roared and charged, his Luxan warrior training making him a whirlwind of controlled violence. His blade met a Peacekeeper baton with a shower of sparks. Aaron moved like liquid death, her Peacekeeper training used against her former comrades with brutal efficiency. But they were outnumbered 50-1. Crichton fired his pulse pistol. Click! Nothing. Q's sabotage was thorough. He reversed the weapon and swung it like a club, catching a Peacekeeper in the jaw. The man went down, but 3 more took his place. Q! Crichton shouted, backing toward the center chamber. A little divine intervention would be great right about now. Q watched the melee with growing fascination. No one was begging, no one was surrendering. Even facing certain death, Moya's crew fought with a desperation and unity he'd never seen in Starfleet officers facing similar odds. Zahn, pacifist Delvian priestess, had her hands pressed against a bulkhead, using some kind of biological ability to accelerate Moya's healing of the breach points. It was buying seconds, nothing more, but she did it anyway. Rigel, cowardly Hynerian deposed royal, was using his throne sled to drop heavy equipment on attappers from above, his high-pitched battle cries almost comical if they weren't so genuine. Even Pilot, trapped in his chamber and unable to physically fight, was rerouting Moya's internal atmosphere to create pressure differentials that knocked attackers off balance. They were losing, badly, but they weren't giving up. And something about that, the sheer, bloody-minded refusal to accept the inevitable, made Q's ancient heart beat just a fraction faster. Interesting, he murmured. A Scaran warrior broke through Dargo's defense, massive hands wrapping around the Luxan's throat. Dargo's face began to turn purple as the heat-producing alien squeezed. Aaron dove to help, but was tackled by 3 Peacekeepers. Crichton swung wildly with his useless pistol, keeping 2 more at bay, but slowly being driven back. Q! Crichton shouted, backing toward the center chamber. A little divine intervention would be great right about now. Q watched the melee with growing fascination. No one was begging, no one was surrendering. Even facing certain death, Moya's crew fought with a desperation and unity he'd never seen in Starfleet officers facing similar odds. Zahn, pacifist Delvian priestess, had her hands pressed against a bulkhead, using some kind of biological ability to accelerate Moya's healing of the breach points. It was buying seconds, nothing more, but she did it anyway. Rigel, cowardly Hynerian deposed royal, was using his throne sled to drop heavy equipment on attackers from above, his high-pitched battle cries almost comical if they weren't so genuine. Even Pilot, trapped in his chamber and unable to physically fight, was rerouting Moya's internal atmosphere to create pressure differentials that knocked attackers off balance. They were losing, badly, but they weren't giving up. And something about that, the sheer bloody-minded refusal to accept the inevitable, made Q's ancient heart beat just a fraction faster. "Interesting," he murmured. A Scaran warrior broke through Dargo's defense, massive hands wrapping around the Luxon's throat. Dargo's face began to turn purple as the heat-producing alien squeezed. Aaron dove to help, but was tackled by 3 peacekeepers. Crichton swung wildly with his useless pistol, keeping 2 more at bay, but slowly being driven back. "Q!" Crichton shouted, backing toward the center chamber. "A little divine intervention would be great right about now."
Reality hiccuped. That was the only way to describe it. One microtot, Scarans and peacekeepers were overwhelming Moya's crew. The next, everyone was frozen, not in time, but in probability. Every particle of their being suspended between states of existence, except Q, who felt the disturbance ripple through dimensions he thought were his exclusive domain, and John Crichton, whose wormhole-laden brain was suddenly ablaze with equations that were solving themselves. "What?" Crichton gasped, staggering as his vision split into multiple timelines simultaneously. He could see futures branching, Dargo dead, Aaron captured, Moya destroyed. But he could also see other paths, other possibilities, and somehow he was touching them all at once. Q spun toward him, eyes widening. "You're doing this? That's impossible." "I'm not doing anything," Crichton shouted, blood trickling from his nose as the wormhole knowledge surged. "It's reacting to you. Your presence is making the equations active." Around them, the frozen boarding parties began to flicker, existing in multiple quantum states as Crichton's mind unconsciously reached through wormhole space, trying to find a timeline where his crew survived. Q had seen wormhole technology. He'd even created a few for entertainment purposes. But this was different. This was wormhole mechanics interfacing with quantum reality in ways that shouldn't be possible, creating a feedback loop between Crichton's ancient implanted knowledge and Q's omnipotent nature. "Stop," Q commanded, but Crichton couldn't hear him. The human was lost in a cascade of possibilities, his mortal mind trying to process infinite futures. Moya's organic systems began to distort. Bulkheads rippled as if seen through water. The frozen peacekeepers and Scarans started to phase between solid and translucent, their individual particles uncertain about which reality they belonged to. And then Q felt something he hadn't experienced in millennia. Concern. Not for himself, he was Q after all, but for Crichton, whose mind was burning itself out trying to contain the impossible. For Moya, whose biological systems were being torn apart by quantum instability. For this crew of survivors who'd somehow managed to make an omnipotent being care about their fate. "John," Q said quietly, placing a hand on Crichton's shoulder. "John, you need to let go." "Can't," Crichton gasped. "I can see how to save them, all of them. I just need to—" "You'll die. Your mortal brain can't handle this level of reality manipulation. I know. I've watched lesser beings try." "Then help me." Crichton grabbed Q's arm, and in that moment of contact, Q saw everything, every timeline, every possibility, every future where Moya's crew lived or died, and at the center of it all, John Crichton sacrificing himself to save his found family. The Q continuum had rules. They didn't interfere. They didn't save mortals. They observed, tested, and judged from their position of absolute superiority. But Q remembered Aaron's words, "We're people trying to survive." He remembered Zahn healing Moya despite the futility, Rigel fighting despite his fear, Dargo refusing to yield, Pilot coordinating defense despite being unable to physically fight. He remembered what it meant to care about something beyond entertainment. "Hold on," Q said, and poured a fraction,
just a fraction of his power into Crichton's mind, not to override the wormhole knowledge, but to stabilize it, to give the human neural pathways the structure they needed to process what they were experiencing. The quantum instability collapsed, reality snapped back into a single state. The frozen boarding parties remained frozen, but now for a different reason. Q had paused time itself while Crichton recovered. Crichton collapsed unconscious but alive, the wormhole equations settling back into dormancy. Q stood in the center of Moya's command chamber, surrounded by frozen peacekeepers and Scarans, and realized something profound. He'd broken continuum protocol. He'd interfered. He'd saved a mortal life, and he'd do it again.
Q unfroze time gradually, layer by layer, giving himself a moment to consider his next move. The continuum would notice eventually. They always did when one of their own broke protocol. But Q found he didn't particularly care. For the first time in eons, he'd acted on something other than boredom or cosmic superiority. He'd acted on compassion. How very human. He looked at Crichton's unconscious form, then at the crew still fighting their impossible battle. Dargo's strength was failing, the Scarran's grip tightening. Aaron was pinned under 3 peacekeepers. The others were seconds from being overwhelmed. Q could send the attackers away, could reshape reality to ensure Moya's crew never faced this threat, could rewrite the entire scenario. But that wouldn't teach anyone anything, would it? Instead, Q snapped his fingers. Time resumed, but with one critical change. Every peacekeeper and Scarran aboard Moya suddenly experienced a vision. Not implanted memories or false realities, but genuine glimpses into possible futures. They saw what Q had seen in Crichton's wormhole-fractured mind. Timelines where wormhole weapons tore apart planets, where peacekeepers and Scarrans obliterated each other in cascading extinction events, where the technology they fought to possess destroyed everything they sought to protect. They saw their children, their worlds, their entire civilizations reduced to quantum debris scattered across dead space. And they saw one other timeline, where they walked away from this ship, from this human, from this weapon, and both their species survived. The Scarran choking Dargo released his grip, staggering backward with horror in his massive eyes. The peacekeepers pinning Aaron stood slowly, their expressions haunted. Across Moya, the boarding parties froze, not from Q's power this time, but from genuine existential dread. Scorpius's voice crackled over the comm. What have you done to my men? Showed them the truth, Q replied simply. Something you've been unwilling to see, Scorpius. Wormhole weapons don't end wars, they end worlds. Your brilliant plan to prevent conflict would guarantee mutual annihilation. On the war dreadnought, Akna stared at tactical displays, showing her troops in full retreat, abandoning Moya without orders. Impossible. Scarran warriors don't flee. They do when they see their eggs crushed under collapsing suns, when they watch their breeding worlds torn apart by the very weapons you'd create from Crichton's knowledge. He appeared on Scorpius's command carrier, standing directly before the half-breed. You wanted to save lives, Scorpius. I respect that. But you were willing to sacrifice one man's mind, his freedom, his very existence to achieve it. That's not salvation. That's just another form of tyranny. Scorpius's cooling rods extended fully, his tactical mind racing through scenarios. The visions, they're not certain futures. No, Q admitted, they're probable ones. The difference being that now your soldiers know what they're truly fighting for, and they've chosen not to fight at all. The last of the boarding parties evacuated Moya, their weapons abandoned, their faces bearing the 1,000-yard stare of those who'd glimpsed apocalypse. Q returned to Moya's center chamber, where the crew was slowly recovering, confused by their attackers' sudden withdrawal.
"What did you do?" Aaron demanded, helping Dargo to his feet. "Leveled the playing field," Q said, "this time for real. Your enemies now understand the stakes. What they do with that knowledge is their choice." Krychen stirred, consciousness returning slowly. Did we survive?" "Thanks to your omnipotent babysitter," Rajo muttered. "Not just me," Q said quietly. "You survived because you refused to give up, because you fought for each other even when victory was impossible. That's something the Continuum stopped doing billions of years ago." He knelt beside Krychen, helping the human sit up. "The wormhole knowledge is still in your head, John. I've stabilized it, but I can't remove it. The Ancients' technology is beyond even my ability to safely extract. You'll carry this burden for the rest of your life." "Great. But hey, at least Harvey's gone. Silver lining." Q smiled sadly. "About that, the neural clone was actually helping regulate the wormhole equations. Without him, they're going to be more volatile. I've compensated as best I can, but you'll need to learn to control them yourself." "So you made it worse?" "I made it different. Whether that's worse or better depends on what you do next."
3 solar days later, Moya drifted in unnamed space, far from Peacekeeper or Scaran territories. The crew was healing, physically at least. The psychological scars of nearly dying would take longer. Q hadn't left. Kryten found him in Moya's observation bay, staring out at the stars with an expression that almost looked contemplative. "Shouldn't you be off tormenting some other universe by now?" Kryten asked, leaning against the organic railing. "Probably," Q admitted. "The Continuum has been vocal about my recent behavior. Apparently, saving mortals and interfering with natural conflict progression is frowned upon." "You're in trouble with the other Qs?" "Trouble is relative when you're omnipotent. Let's just say I'm being strongly encouraged to return and explain myself." Q turned to face Kryten. "But I wanted to check on you first. How's the wormhole situation?" Kryten tapped his temple. "Quieter. Still there, but not screaming anymore. It's like background music instead of a rock concert in my skull." "Good. The stabilization is holding." Q paused, and for once his usual smirk was absent. "I owe you an apology, John Kryten." "Wow, the omnipotent being apologizes. Mark this day in history." "I'm serious. I came here looking for entertainment, treating your lives like a game. I put you in danger because I was bored and wanted to see how you'd react under pressure. That was wrong." Kryten studied Q's face, looking for the sarcasm, the cosmic joke. Found none. "You really mean that?" "I do. The Q Continuum has spent billions of years observing lesser species, testing them, judging them. But we stopped participating, stopped caring. We became so detached from mortal existence that we forgot what it means to truly live, to struggle, to fear, to sacrifice for something beyond yourself." Q gestured toward the center chamber, where Jean was leading them in meditation. "You people, this ridiculous collection of escaped prisoners and misfits, you reminded me of something I'd forgotten. Mortality isn't a weakness, it's what gives existence meaning. Every choice you make matters because your time is finite." "That's very profound for someone who used to turn people into furniture." Q laughed. "I still might, if they're particularly annoying, but I understand now why humanity fascinated me in my universe. It's not your potential, it's your persistence, your absolute refusal to accept that some things are impossible." Aaron appeared in the doorway. "Scorpius is hailing us. He wants to speak with you, Q." In the center chamber, Scorpius's face filled the view screen. The half-breed looked exhausted, his cooling rods barely managing his body temperature.
"Entity Q," Scorpius began carefully. "The Peacekeepers and Scarans have reached an accord. Both parties agree that pursuing Krypton's wormhole knowledge is inadvisable given the probable consequences you revealed. Sensible, Q said. However, Scorpius continued, there is concern about your continued presence in this universe. You represent an unpredictable variable, a power that cannot be controlled or reasoned with. He's saying you make everyone nervous, Crichton translated. I understand, Q said, and truthfully, I was planning to leave anyway. I've learned what I came here to learn. Scorpius's expression didn't change, but there was a flicker of something, relief perhaps, in his eyes. Then this is farewell. For now, Q agreed, though I may check in occasionally. You people have a habit of getting into trouble, and I find that I'm invested in your continued survival. The transmission ended. Q turned to Moya's crew, all of whom had gathered to witness his departure. Before you go, Zahn said, I have a question. Why did you really come here? Entertainment cannot be the only reason. Q considered this. The Q continuum exists outside time, outside consequence. We've achieved everything, seen everything, become everything. But in doing so, we've lost something essential. I came here searching for it, though I didn't realize that's what I was doing. And did you find it? Dargo asked. Yes. I found beings who choose to care for each other, not because they're programmed to, not because it's logical, but because connection, however temporary, however fragile, is what makes existence bearable. Q's smile was genuine. Thank you for that lesson. So what happens now? Rajal asked. You go back to your continuum and forget about us? Forget? Impossible. You've given me something to think about for the next few billion years. Q snapped his fingers, and suddenly the center chamber was filled with supplies, medical equipment, food, spare parts for Moya. Consider this a parting gift and a promise. If you ever truly need me, if the universe threatens to crush you beyond your ability to survive, call out and I'll hear. How? Asked Crichton. The wormhole equations connect realities now, remember? They'll find me if you need them to. Q prepared to vanish, then paused. One more thing, John. That knowledge in your head, don't let it define you. Don't let it become your only value to yourself or others. You're more than a weapon or a prize. You're a person who survived the impossible and stayed human through it all. Don't lose that. I'll try, Crichton said quietly. Good enough. Q raised his hand in a decidedly Vulcan salute, a small joke for his own amusement. Live long and prosper, as they say in my universe, or in your case, survive well and stay free. Reality shimmered, and Q was gone. The crew stood in silence for several microtots after Q vanished, processing what had just happened. An omnipotent being had entered their lives, nearly gotten them killed, saved them, taught them something profound, and departed, leaving behind more questions than answers. Well, Crichton finally said, that was weird, even by our standards. He gave us supplies, Pilot reported, his voice carrying relief through Moya's systems, medical equipment we desperately needed, spare parts for systems damaged in the boarding, food stores that will last us half a cycle. And he fixed my head, Crichton added, touching his temple where the wormhole equations now hummed quietly instead of screaming. Sort of. Erin moved beside him, her hand finding his. Will he come back? Probably. Q's like a cosmic cat. Shows up when you least expect it, knocks things over, then leaves before you can throw him out. Dargo sheathed his Qualta blade. At least Scorpius and the Scarans have backed off, for now. They saw what we saw, Zahn said softly. The futures where wormhole weapons destroyed everything. That fear will last longer than any truce agreement. Rigel hovered his throne sled closer to the view screen.
So what now? We're still fugitives, still hunted, still living day to day in the Uncharted Territories. Same as always, Crichton said. We survive, we watch each other's backs, we keep moving. But something had changed. Q's visit had reminded them that even in a universe of militaristic empires, brutal wars, and impossible odds, connection mattered. Choice mattered. The fact that they kept fighting for each other, kept refusing to give up, that mattered most of all. Moya's engines hummed to life, ready for starburst. The living ship had recovered, her crew was intact, and somewhere ahead lay whatever challenges the Uncharted Territories would throw at them next. But they'd faced an omnipotent being and survived. Anything else seemed manageable by comparison. As Moya jumped to starburst, none of them noticed the brief shimmer of reality in the observation bay. Q, invisible, watching them go with something that might have been pride. The Q continuum could debate his actions for eons. They could judge his interference, question his motives, demand explanations. But Q had rediscovered something worth more than omnipotence, the ability to care about the fate of beings whose lives flickered like candles in an infinite dark. Moya's crew survived because they fought for each other, and Q had helped because, for the first time in billions of years, he'd wanted to. The Farscape universe had taught Q what his own had forgotten, that even the smallest lives, the briefest moments, could matter, could change things, could remind a jaded ancient being what it meant to truly exist. And perhaps in some distant future, when Moya's crew faced their darkest hour, Q would remember this lesson and return. Until then, they had their freedom, their ship, and each other. It would have to be enough. May the Force be with you. More stories await.